Audio test 1 for the meeting stream. Audio test 2 for the meeting stream.
Check, check, check.
Audio test 3 for the meeting stream.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to start in about 1 minute. If you could take your seats, and we'll be able to start in about 1 minute. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I would like to call us to order. This is the 9th meeting of the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee and the first meeting of this year. The City of Ottawa is located on unceded, never surrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe First Nations people. They have been inhabitants and stewards of these lands for millennia, and we honor and recognize them. Turn to our committee coordinator to conduct a roll call, please.
Councillor Bradley. Councillor Duresh.
Here.
Councillor Dudas.
Present.
Councillor Devine.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Johnson.
Here.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Luloff.
Good morning.
Councillor Plante.
Ici.
Vice Chair Hill. Chair Brockington.
Here.
You have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, and I believe that Councillor Hill, Vice Chair Hill is traveling today, so he may be able to join us later in the meeting. Okay, just a few items to bring to your attention first. When we get to item 6, which is the employee status of rural firefighters item, members were alerted yesterday that Councillor Dudas was considering moving a motion. That is now off the table. Councillor Dudas will not be moving a motion in this regard. And item 5.1, the emergency management program update, we are going to defer that to the next meeting. So let's go through our agenda, and if there are any questions. So first of all, any declarations of interest? Seeing none, item 3 is the confirmation of minutes from our last meeting, meeting 8, Thursday the 1st of December 2023. Any issues with the minutes? Are these minutes received? Thank you. We have 2 responses from inquiries. Staff have provided replies. The first, 4.1 bylaw training standards, and 4.2 cost of overdose response. Any issues from members? We've not received any requests to pull these items, so they can be carried or received. Received, thank you. 5.1 emergency management program update. As I indicated, Director Gooding will be available next month, and I'm just going to look to the committee coordinator. We do not need a motion to defer this item, is that correct?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so this item will be moved to our March 21st meeting. Item 6 is the employee status of rural firefighters. We do have a presentation from staff, and I do understand we have 2 delegates, so we will hold this item. Item 6.2 is the enhanced false fire alarm strategy. I do believe staff have a presentation on this item, so we will hold this as well. And item 6.3 is the status update on towing and storage regulations and provincial regime. Colleagues, this is more of a housekeeping or tidy up motion. Staff are prepared to provide a presentation should any member request a presentation. What is the will of this committee? Would you like a presentation and have this item held, or are you prepared to carry this on consent? Does anyone request a presentation? You would like a presentation? All right, we will hold this item. Thank you. Item 7, Office of the City Clerk, status update, Emergency Preparedness and Protective Service Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending 6 February 2024. Can we receive this information report? All right, thank you. Okay, we will go back then to our first held item, which is item 6, employee status of rural firefighters. And as members recall, we did receive legal opinion on this matter to help inform our decision-making. And before we begin with the staff presentation, I'd just like to turn to the Deputy City Clerk to provide some information to colleagues in the event they have questions that are in camera in nature.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members would have received with the agenda a copy of confidential document 1 to this report, which includes information that relates to labor relations and is subject to solicitor-client privilege. So any questions or consideration of the subject matter contained in document 1 would necessitate the committee to proceed into closed session pursuant to subsection 239(2) of the Municipal Act and subsection 13(1)D and 13(1)F of the procedure bylaw, which permit the consideration of these matters in closed session. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so at this time, I'll turn to General Manager Ayat for introductions. And after the staff presentation, as I indicated, we do have 2 delegates who will be received, and then we'll get into questions from committee members. So, General Manager, good morning.
Thank you, Chair Brockington. I'm going to be very quick. This is an important item that we've been working on for a long time, and we're hoping to have committee support as we move forward. The presentation is very self-explanatory. Fire Chief Hutt is here to make some comments. As far as I'm concerned, this is a good news story, and we're hoping to have everyone's support. Thank you, Chief Hutt.
Thank you, GM Ayat. Good morning, Chair, members of committee. I am pleased to be here today to present the rural firefighter employee status. Next slide, please. So an overview of our current state. Ottawa Fire Service Rural Division provides emergency response, public education, fire prevention, and community support. Rural firefighters, also known as volunteer firefighters, represent 40% of OFS's resources and provides 80% of Ottawa's landmass. There's approximately 500 rural firefighters across 16 rural stations and 4 composite stations. Rural firefighters are NFPA certified. Rural firefighters are not currently designated as city employees, but considered volunteers with the city. Rural firefighters and the Rural Advisory Committee have been seeking employee status similar to other casual employees with the city. Next slide, please. So it is staff's recommendation that the city recognize rural firefighters as employees, conversion of rural firefighters to casual employees. The Ontario Labour Relations Board has found that rural firefighters can be employees for the purpose of the Labour Relations Act, and rural firefighters maintain their volunteer firefighter status under the Fire Protection and Prevention Act, which aligns with the city's concurrent employment policy. Next slide, please. What are the benefits? It improves the retention of skilled rural firefighters. It offers recognition for the important contribution of rural firefighters in ensuring safety of our communities. It upholds our response times and standards and controls cost effectively. Rural firefighters will be eligible to receive benefits including pension, OMERS, vacation pay, CPP, and EI. It'll also offer a sustainable support to our rural residents for things such as power outages, floods, tornadoes, windstorms, ice storms, and wildland fires that we've seen more recently. It also aligns with the terms of council priorities, ensuring emergency services response to models that meets demands and improves results. Next slide, please. The implementation, staff will take the necessary internal administration measures in accordance with the human resource policies, and costs of this conversion will be absorbed within the Ottawa Fire Service existing operating budget. And this is my last slide, but just in closing, our rural members provide a very vital service to our residents, and they represent the city with professionalism and integrity. It's also to recognize a recognition showing that they are valued and that the sacrifice that they do supporting our community each and every day. You know, the calamity of events that we've been seeing, you know, with the wildland fires, the tornadoes, the major storm events, this is an opportunity for us to retain members that can continue to support our communities. This is very positive for our residents. This concludes our presentation, but available for questions.
Thank you, Chief, for your presentation. We will hear from our public delegates first, and then we'll entertain questions to our staff. So we do have two speakers this morning, Mr. Chris Burke and Mr. Fred Carmasino, representing the Rural Firefighters Association Executive. You can come individually, or I understand you may want to present together? Okay, all right. So if you're going to blend your time, I believe we'll provide 10 minutes. If you're both going to go together.
Certainly appreciate that, Chair.
Okay.
We've decided that we probably would have spoken in a number of ways, overlapped our conversations. So while we're both appearing today, the message is similar. And the message is, as members, we're on the executive of the Rural Fire Advisory Committee that works day in and day out with Fire SMT and the leadership team there, with the General Manager and Emergency and Protective Services. We represent about close to 500 rural members serving in communities, Navan all the way out to Fitzroy Harbor, from one end of the city to the other. As the Chief had indicated, 4 composite stations and 16 rural stations. Our position in terms of moving in this direction is that we had hoped that the law and legislation is extremely clear on this matter with regard to rural members being employees, no different than any other casual member of the City of Ottawa. As the Chief mentioned, we respond to a huge variety of calls, and certainly in the last 5 years, with the explosion of natural disasters, it has been a huge impact on the rural division. So we see this as the right decision for us to gain employee status, as a notion of retention. And I think, just to inform the rest of the committee, municipalities across the entire province are faced with retention and recruitment issues within the volunteer scope for a number of reasons. It's increased demands on their personal time, increased demands for NFPA certifications to bring them up to the highest level that the provincial standards allow for, increase in call volume, as we see, the other discussion this morning about an alarm bylaw. So increase in the number of calls and the frequency, specialized services throughout the rural area and wildland firefighting, et cetera. So in addition to that, we see a bit of a decline in the volunteerism, pure volunteerism of our communities in the rural areas, just because of the notion that there is a lot less time in our society today to meet those demands. However, we appreciate, most importantly, that this is before council, before this committee, and we feel certainly that the support that we have had from the General Manager and from the Fire Chief to recognize both our association and the direction that we have taken, we believe it's the right thing to do, both from a recognition point of view, from a retention point of view for rural firefighters, and most importantly from a legal perspective. So we'd like to thank the General Manager and Chief Hutt, but we will continue, as we have done for the last 10 years, to work together to make great progress, and trust we will be recognized as employee status for the good of the fire service, for the good of the City of Ottawa, and for the good of the residents and the visitors to the City of Ottawa who we serve. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And just for the record, are you Mr. Burke?
Sorry, Chris Burke?
Yes, okay, very much.
My colleague, Fred Carmasino, beside me.
Thank you. And sir, do you have anything to add?
Chair, I don't believe I do. He said it well, and I think he covered everything. I think just to summarize, this is the right thing to do. I think we're on the right track here, so we appreciate your time today.
Thank you both for your presentations today, and also for representing rural firefighters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we will take questions. Oh, sorry, any questions?
Any questions?
To our delegates? Councillor Johnston, yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being here today. I was wondering if you could please expand for us the issues of retention and recruitment. I mean, it certainly, I don't know how it compares to the full complement of permanent employees. So you describe a difference there. Could you expand on that for this committee?
I think if I hear your question correctly, Councillor, challenges across all of Ontario, as I've seen in some work I've been doing across Ontario for various fire departments, small and large municipalities. Challenges for the City of Ottawa is passing that threshold of being able to attract volunteers. Some significant changes have occurred in the last number of years, primarily doing with certification of NFPA standards within the fire service. Time commitment from volunteers, time commitment from families, you know, the loss of the transitory nature of rural residents and their ability to volunteer have all impacted on us being able to retain individuals over the years. This would be just one more step to allow people to feel some security in the workforce. We also see, and this is a very positive thing, but we also see a loss of our workforce to the full-time workforce. So you go from being a rural firefighter to a career firefighter, which in my mind, it's a positive because you're basically looking, the city is looking at a bank of qualified employees already, and they're moving to the next level if that's what they're seeking. However, that does have an impact on rural firefighting. But a lot of the other social dynamics that are out there in terms of people's changes in social attitudes and volunteering and commitment and family status and all those issues all tie into retention. So we're hoping this will be one thing. Our recruitment, I think, is going on right now where we will be going out again and working very hard and diligently to keep all of the 16 stations in all of the rural communities fully staffed to serve the public. So this is just one more step that I think that we need to take to ensure that we're doing everything possible to achieve long-term success.
Thank you very much. And in your experience across the province, is this a solution that other municipalities and other areas are taking to solve the problems that you've identified or the challenges that you've identified?
We have seen a number of municipalities move to this status before us, and in the last few weeks, I've actually talked to a number of fire chiefs around the province, and they've also said they're looking at the same solution, but other departments have already done this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kelly, you're next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chris and Fred, for being here today. Both of you are constituents of mine and volunteers at the Dunrobin Fire Station, so I appreciate the time that you take to give back to your community, and I think that you both embody the true spirit of the rural firefighter. And I'm not sure if you did mention Mr. Burke in your statements, but he was a full-time firefighter with the City of Ottawa for many years, so brings I think a unique perspective to this conversation, having been a full-time firefighter and now a volunteer in the community. I met you, Fred, for the first time flipping pancakes at a breakfast for the community. So the service that you guys do goes above and beyond just responding to fire calls. And it's my understanding that you don't receive compensation for those types of events. So thank you very much. Before we had this meeting, I reached out to a number of volunteer firefighters in Ward 5 to discuss this with them and see what their take was. And I've got a couple of quotes here from people who have responded to me, and I just wanted to say those and see what you have to say about that and make sure that what we're doing here today will help fix these issues. So this is something that I've definitely support. It would certainly be help with retention and a small perk for us. This would likely also help for employment within the city for a seniority type of situation. For all the late nights, training, on calls in the cold, fully volunteering for pancake breakfasts and fundraisers, I think this will go a long way. Our current pay at $18 to $28 an hour barely covers the fuel and wear and tear on the vehicles, let alone our time. Doing all the, I'm not going to say that. Sucks having to do the night shift and then full-timers get cleared and we are left to clean up the hoses and then have to be at work for 6 or 7 a.m. and do a lower level of work at our main income jobs. Could get fired for low performance at our main job for being a volunteer hero all night. Do some of those statements resonate with what you've been hearing amongst the service? And do you think the changes that we're proposing here today will help alleviate some of those feelings?
Yeah, sure, I'll answer
Yeah, I'll let
that.
Fred speak.
I mean, you got some candid responses there and sort of much appreciated sharing that with the group. I think I'll maybe just hone in on one. And I think the recognition as city employees is so important. I think I heard it about a few years ago when we started this process that a part-time lifeguard would have a higher standing with the city of Ottawa than a 20-year rural firefighter. So by those reasons alone, I think this is the right move. You know, I won't get into the sort of political part about the urban-rural divide, not the forum for this right now, but it's certainly going in the right direction to recognize the job that people do, men and women, day in, day out for the rural parts of the city.
And Councillor, I'll just add that there is an expectation as the councillor for Ward 5 that you will be at Dunrobin Fire Hall to flip pancakes again this year. Thank you.
I will be, and I'm actually currently in discussions with the Integrity Commissioner to see if it's appropriate that I sign up to be a rural firefighter.
Thank you.
Wow.
I will have more to say, but I'll do that later.
Thank you, Councillor.
I was just going to chime in and say pancakes should not be limited just to this member here. Councillor Dudas, and then Luloff and Hubley. Councillor Dudas.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I apologize, I'm struggling with my voice today. I just wanted to say that I think I was shocked that this hadn't happened already. The work, the commitment, absolute dedication from our rural firefighters, many of whom are actually juggling full-time jobs on the side, is phenomenal. And when I saw that, you know, I think these discussions have been happening since 2019 to have this more formal status placed upon the volunteer firefighters. I was so happy to see that this is coming forward. I fully support it. To see that folks will now be eligible for pension and vacation pay. You'll now be able to see internal job postings within the city. It just makes absolute sense to me. And I'm really pleased to see that we have this in front of us. Do you think, I mean, a number of us have asked about retention. I also spoke to a couple of rural firefighters out in the east end of the city, and they were saying that, you know, some firefighters were leaving after 3-4 years. They just weren't sticking around because it wasn't worth it to them. They were putting, you know, so much time and effort and training and then going back to their full-time jobs and trying to juggle a family at the same time, that they just couldn't make it work, even though they were really, really invested in it. Do you think that this will improve morale, that not only will you be able to retain, but attraction to volunteer firefighting, and that you'll be able to maintain that kind of, sorry, forgive me, I'm very sick right now, but hopefully you know where I'm going. I just wanted to see, do you think that this will shore up their morale, that they'll know how much we support them, and that they'll continue to work for the city of Ottawa?
In answering your question, Councillor, I think first and foremost, this will be a very, very positive morale booster for all rural firefighters. It's obviously, as you mentioned, has been in the works since 2019. And, you know, again, I'll thank the general manager and the fire chief for their due diligence to keep this under a microscope and bring it forward to council, because it is something that rural firefighters have been talking about day in and day out, week in, week out, after calls, at trainings, et cetera. And I absolutely believe it will make a huge difference for those individuals that are out there that are on the cusp, perhaps, of making the decision. And as I said earlier in my delivery, there are a lot of other external factors that, you know, we really can't address that much, like the transitory nature of people losing their jobs or having to relocate to a different area of the city or to another city. Sometimes they volunteer in other cities and sometimes we lose them. Most importantly, I think it's the feeling of most of the people that we represent with the Rural Fire Advisory Group that we're moving in the right direction, and this will be a staple in ensuring that a number of people will maintain their status with the Rural Fire Service and Ottawa Fire Services.
Well, thank you both so much, and thank you to all the rural firefighters for everything you do. You have my full support. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor, and wishing you a speedy recovery. Councillor Luloff and then Hubley.
Well, finally, here we are. I know that you guys and with the general manager and the leadership of people like Denise Charbonneau and your incredible team, along with the fire chief. Finally, we're here. You certainly deserve this recognition. We are a 80% rural city. That is a massive coverage area. And just since 2020, I've had rural firefighters help out with things like flooding, fatal collisions through our rural villages and in our rural areas, often the first on the scene. Massive property fires where homes have been saved because of how quickly people that live in the community can get to the property, water rescues, and the incredible work that you do as volunteers in the community. It is so incredibly appreciated. I've had rural firefighters come out on their off time to help me fill sandbags to protect people's property and lives during major flooding events. You've been there for us for years, and it's nice to finally feel like we're being there for you. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for the incredible work that you do in our rural areas, and that being 80% of our city. The incredible work that you do every single day as members of our community, I believe, makes you twice the citizen, and really, truly appreciate the fact that you've kept up with this, and due to your leadership and leadership of Chief Hutt and our GM, we're finally here. So congratulations, and let's continue to work together to protect our rural areas. Well done.
Thank you, Councillor Luloff. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Chair. I want to echo Councillor Luloff's comments and appreciation for the work that the men and women of the volunteer service do. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of them and see firsthand some of the work they do. For example, the big fire that was in the Greenbelt a number of years ago nearby the homes in my area. If it wasn't for the volunteer firefighters, we would have lost homes and maybe lives and that, but their quick action and experience took care of that. And I won't take or miss the opportunity to take a shot at the NCC for not managing their woods as well as the city does. And maybe our forestry people could give some lessons to them on how to maintain the Greenbelt. But I also want to thank Chief Hutt and the GM for getting this done, because it has been talked about for a number of years, and you've got it, hopefully after the vote today in a council, that you've got this done for the volunteers. And so I really appreciate your efforts as well in this. And also want to get on the record that I think Councillor Kelly may want to confirm, but I think he applied to be a volunteer firefighter before this report came out. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, I can confirm that. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley. Do we have any other speakers on this matter? All right.
Wrap up.
Do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I got it. I worked hard on it, so.
Go ahead.
Thanks.
Second rounders. Yes, this is for the delegates. Yeah. Any other questions for our delegates? Seeing none, thank you, gentlemen, both, for your delegations this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors.
Thank you. We now turn to questions to staff, and I recognize Councillor Bradley.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the presentation today, Chief Hutt. My question is just on the finances. So it's $500,000 annually that will be absorbed through your budget. Could you just elaborate on how you're absorbing that pressure year after year?
Chair, thank you for that question, Councillor. this was very important for us to move this initiative forward, and we recognize it was past a budget cycle. So we have been working very extensively with fleet services. Our deficit last year, we had a deficit in fleet services, and so we're working, and facilities. So we've been working with both of those groups to see how we can close that gap between that deficit, and we're making huge strides on that as well. So that there's two components we're looking at. We're also, because of the support of this committee and council, we're moving ahead with a medical practitioner, which we hope from a WSIB perspective, we're going to have people return sooner to work. So there's some cost savings we hope we're going to see there as well. And lastly, there is some gap funding between when we run a recruit class, when the members actually come onto the floor. So there is some gap funding that we believe we're able to reallocate those funds to cover that cost.
Thank you for that, and I definitely support this report, but the funding seems a little precarious to me, and that there's a lot of we hope that this will happen. So is there potential that this could be a budget pressure in 2025 or 2026 if you don't realize those savings?
Again, this is a high priority of ours, and we're just going to have to keep it as a high priority and jostle it as we move forward when we look into our budget deliberations. But I'm very confident within fire services, within EPS, we'll be able to find those funds for years to come. Thank you. And will this eliminate any volunteer element to Ottawa Fire Services? I'm sorry, Councillor, will this, like if we make these employees casual employees, is there going to be any volunteer element left in Ottawa Fire Services, or you're an employee or not? So yeah, what we're recommending today, our current volunteers have it's a volunteer classification. So we're reclassifying all 475 members to casual part-time employees with the city. So there will no longer be volunteer. And not to convolute things, but certainly under our legislation, under the Fire Protection and Prevention Act, they will remain as volunteer firefighters because they fit the definition, but certainly from a city perspective, they will be City of Ottawa casual employees. And does changing their status introduce any additional constraints from an employment perspective? So do they have like less vacation time? Because I assume with the volunteer status, you have more flexibility in managing your schedule. So does this introduce any additional constraints that maybe some volunteers now don't want? So we actually see very little change in how we're going to administer our program. The very fortunate thing we have with our volunteers or our rural members right now is that there isn't a hard schedule. There's training nights, there's activities, but for example, if they're not available when an emergency comes in, they don't have to respond. So we do have to continue with that flexibility, because I think if it becomes too rigid, it will be too difficult to continue to attract people within the service. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kitts, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm not a member of this committee, but it was important for me to be here today just to lend my support to this initiative and to thank senior leadership for bringing it forward. As my rural colleagues have said, volunteer firefighters serve just a tremendous benefit to our communities. I actually find it's hard to put into words the gratitude that rural residents have for those that are volunteering their time to keep us safe. You know, we're talking about neighbors that are on call to respond to really challenging and dangerous situations in our communities. You know, you heard some examples already, but barn fires, high-speed car accidents, floods, runaway bushfires, and I find urban residents are often surprised to know that in the community I live in, there's no fire hydrants because we're not connected to city water. So the types of incidents that rural firefighters are responding to, you know, are different and challenging. And I would likely get emotional talking about the response we saw after the derecho. And as the chief and delegates noted, those kinds of incidents are only becoming more common, unfortunately. So as others have noted, these volunteers are also community builders by organizing and attending events constantly in our communities. And I'm just so tremendously grateful for those 500 volunteers who are keeping us safe. So I do encourage everyone on this committee to vote in favor today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Luloff and then Desroches.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. And again, GM Ayat and Chief Hutt, thanks again for your leadership on this. I know that this is something that you've both cared about for a very long time, so it's great to see you have worked out some of the intricacies of this, and we've finally gotten here. Chief Hutt, I was wondering if you could speak maybe a little bit about how this enhances access to support for your members when it comes to things like mental health. Does this enhance their ability to access services like that now that they are considered full employees?
Chair, thank you for that question. Regardless if we maintain the volunteer status or we move ahead with a casual employee, our rural division have always had access to all the support mechanisms. You talk about peer support, you talk about mental health wellness programs. We've been very fortunate that they have been part of that since the onset. I think if Councillor, this really offers the recognition for what they're doing each and every day, and really that's what this is about. The program, there's going to be a small monetary increase from a vacation pay perspective. They'll be eligible to register into OMERS if they feel that's what they want to do. But we are very fortunate to have these members in our service, and they do provide fabulous work, and they are ambassadors in our rural areas. So we're going to continue to support our rural members as we do everybody in the Ottawa Fire Service.
Incredible. And so do you feel that, we have our strictly rural stations. We also have composite stations as well. Do you feel that this development, if passed today, will lead to kind of further integration between your full-time members and now your casual part-time members in establishing kind of a more group feel and cohesion between the two groups?
Chair, that is, we're always working to, with those relationships, and they're very dynamic as well. And I can say over the years we are certainly closing that gap. Working, we do have our Rural Fire Advisory Committee. They spoke today. They're extremely open-minded. We also right now have a union president and association that's very willing to work as well. So that really helps foster those inner workings between urban and rural, and we're going to continue to foster, positive relationships as we work together.
That's wonderful. As I mentioned before, we owe our rural firefighters and our full-time firefighters a deep debt of gratitude for the incredible work that they do every single day, often being first on the scene for medical emergencies, disasters, property damage. So again, thank you to your women and men for the incredible work you do. And thank you again to you and the GM for your leadership on this. I know that this is something that you both take very seriously and take to heart. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Desroches.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the delegations. Thank you to staff for bringing this forward. I'm going to support the staff recommendation. I think it's a logical next step for the current circumstances that we're in. I'd be curious, though, Chief, your view of the future. I look at some areas of the cities as we grow, and I wonder if we still have the right model. I look at Greeley, I look at Manotick. Increasingly, the population's growing. I look at the 416, which I travel regularly with my family for hockey. Is the rural model still fit with these communities in terms of part-time folks, or potentially down the road would we be looking at having kind of full-time services to respond to what, is not rural. I would say that it's in between, a very highly populated area, right, that is in a village context now. So I guess it's more around, are the villages properly served with the current model, and do we see potentially for certain areas like the 416 where we need more of a full-time response?
Chair, Councillor, thanks for that question. There isn't a day that goes by that we're not looking and doing our analysis, and we often mention that we do station location studies, which we're currently looking at now. We also do our accreditation, and it's the accreditation process where we looked at effective response force, and we look at things like intensification and growth, and the city is growing. There's no question about it, and so there's no secret within our service. We are the largest composite model in Canada, and as we grow, it grows from inwards outwards. So as we expand, we have to start to look at where those trigger points reach, where we say we move from a rural or a composite to an urban, and those are on our radar. And as per our last and through budget, we're currently looking at Stittsville, for example, and they're currently volunteer, but they've met a threshold from intensification, from growth, from a rural to an urban setting. So we're doing those transitions as we speak, and areas such as you have mentioned in the suburbs and in the rural areas, we do look at those, and at some point we'll be coming before a committee to make those recommendations that we need to start to move from a rural model to a composite model. And there are a lot of parameters and triggers and matrix that we use to when we meet that threshold, and we'll be coming forth with that.
Thank you for the answer, and again, I think the response today that we're taking is fitting for the circumstances, and pleased to hear that you're looking ahead, that maybe the model has to change as our city grows. Just curious on the 416, once it gets into the rural areas, are we satisfied that our responses to what can be high volumes of traffic, a lot of trucks serving the urban population in the city of Ottawa, you're satisfied that the model out there is sufficient to respond to what can be very serious motor vehicle accidents, what have you?
Councillor, I'm very confident with the model, our current deployment model. As we reported in our annual report, we looked at first time on scene, effective response force, and that's a joint venture between volunteer and rural members and career, and so those parameters are all taken into consideration. End of the day, we send the closest truck with the available resources, the tool to serve our residents that can get there the quickest. And that's, in general, that's how we look at things.
Okay, thank you, Chief. That's all for me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kelly, and then Kavanagh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to everyone who's been involved in moving this forward. I know this is a topic of discussion that's been going on for a while, and I think many rural firefighters appreciate that we're here today having this conversation and making the decision. And rural firefighters train to the same level as their full-time equivalents at the City of Ottawa, and while they do receive some compensation for what they do, they have a whole life outside of their jobs as rural firefighters. Aside from the time they spend training on Wednesday evenings and responding to calls when they're available, the vast majority of firefighters in my ward do hold down full-time jobs. They're out with their kids, they're out doing groceries, they're helping with homework, they're asleep, resting for the next day. When that call comes in, and I don't know if they still use pagers, but last time I checked they were, and when that pager goes off, they drop what they're doing and they come to the rescue of their fellow community members, and they don't just fight fires. I've had to call 911 a couple times in my life. Once was for a flu fire, but in June 2020, I got a call from my dad. My mother had had a medical emergency. There were no ambulances available in the City of Ottawa, but within 8 minutes, there were volunteer firefighters from Constance Bay and from other stations in West Carleton, and that was a tough day for my family. My mom didn't make it through that, but when I got home, it was a volunteer firefighter, someone who used to live in the community I grew up in, who met me at the end of my driveway and told me that my mom had passed. And I can't imagine walking into that scene from his perspective. And, it just reminded me of the extremely important role that these folks play in our community. And They're out at events, like we said, flipping pancakes, and I don't think there's any event that Sparky can't make better. At least that's my opinion. So with response times for ambulances in rural areas being really slow, they often show up to medical calls and have to deal with a whole slew of different things, which have already been mentioned today, so I won't ramble on. But simply put, Mr. Chair, these folks make life in rural wards possible, and we are very grateful for the work that they do. And I think these changes indicate, how much we care about them and the vital role that they play in the city of Ottawa and our rural community. So I hope that we can all support the recommendations today. And thank you very much for being here. And thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Thank you very much. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you. Very hard to follow that. Our deepest sympathy on that whole situation. I just want to say I support the fact that people are doing something volunteer that's absolutely essential to residents of Ottawa. Rural residents are equal to urban residents in terms of what they need and services they should have. So there's no question that this makes sense going forward. I have a question. In terms of for lack of better term, volunteer firefighters, the rural firefighters, are they in line for employment for full time? Is that often a step forward?
Chair, through you. Our volunteer program have to follow the same process as our urban recruitment process. What benefits they do have, however, is they are trained, they are certified, but they do have to follow the exact same steps as other members of our community.
Okay, but traditionally, do you see a lot of recruitment from there?
So you have members in our community that are trained, that are skilled, and have the certifications. So when through the recruitment process, they certainly are, hitting a lot of areas that we're looking for future candidates. But we also have to take into consideration that there's a large population of Ottawa that don't necessarily live in the rural area. So during our recruitment process, we have to handle that very carefully. And everybody does have to follow the same application process moving through.
Okay, I appreciate that because I know that you've been working very hard on that process, and we need to continue to work on diversity and gender equity as well. So, I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions or comments on this item? I'll just add my 2 cents worth. So I will, of course, be supporting the 2 recommendations before us. And I appreciate the work and effort that has been invested to date to get us to where we are today. This is not a simple transition. It's clear that many factors had to be reviewed and assessed before we got to the recommendations before us. And in my mind, rural firefighters are already working and acting as casual employees. So this is the formal transition to that classification. And I want to thank our rural colleagues in particular who have brought the rural perspective to our attention today. They see firsthand the value that our rural firefighters contribute to communities, and I think that's enriched our discussion today. So thank you to all colleagues for your questions and comments today. I've asked the committee coordinator to record our vote. The vote before us today is, the recommendation reads that the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee recommend that Council approve the conversion of Ottawa rural firefighters to casual employees within the City of Ottawa. And the second part is that we direct staff to take the necessary internal administrative measures in accordance with the HR policies. I'll ask the committee coordinator to take a recorded vote. Thank you.
Councillor Lulov.
That's a wholehearted yes for me.
Councillor Dudas.
Absolutely.
Councillor Kelly.
Yes.
Councillor Johnson.
Yes.
Councillor Devine.
Absolutely, yes.
Councillor Bradley.
Yes.
Councillor Blunt.
Oui.
Councillor Duresh.
Wait.
Councillor Hubley,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hill, Chair Brockington,
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. That's a unanimous vote. This matter will be debated by City Council on February 21st. So thank you very much for that item. We move along now to item 6.2, which is the enhanced false fire alarm strategy. We have a presentation as well from Chief Hutt. We have no delegations on this matter, but Chief Hutt, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. If you don't mind, I'll just say a few words.
Please go ahead. Yes, General Manager, sorry.
This is another one of those areas where we've worked very hard for many, many years to try and reduce our false alarm. We've had a strategy for the past 20 years since amalgamation, a strategy of education and prevention, and we worked very hard with a lot of people to try and reduce the numbers. Unfortunately, we haven't been successful as we needed to be. While we reduce some, the numbers keep growing. As a result of that, this is the logical next step, and that's to introduce a fee structure. Now, some municipalities have introduced a fee structure across the board. We want to take a measured approach and look at it from, a stepped approach, a phased approach, where we actually start the fee structure with those that we believe are preventable alarms, and Chief Hutt will get into that. But those that are mechanical failures that, regular maintenance would have solved. Those where people didn't call in alarms to the fire station while they're doing testing. These are all things that these companies should be able to do. And they just, I don't know if they're refusing to do it or they just don't have it as part of their practice. And we need to have this fee to be initiated so that we can actually go in and continue to educate them and get them to do what they need to do. So based on that, I think this is a public safety issue. This creates large trucks to respond in accordance with provincial standards, lights and sirens. We can't respond at a level 2. We have to respond as if there's an actual incident. So it puts people at risk. And as a result of that, we've been very passionate about moving this forward as well. And I think it's the right next step. So I will now pass it on to Fire Chief Hutt.
Thank you very much, GM Ayotte. Chair, committee members, I am excited to be here to present the enhanced false fire alarm strategy. With me today, I have Deputy Chief Nathan Adams with their Community Standards and Communications, also known as our fire prevention group. So he's worked very hard on this portfolio. Next slide, please. Our current state. 37% of calls, total calls, are false fire alarms. 13% are nuisance fire alarms. We have negative resident impacts for false alarms, mainly because of complacency with residents. It also diverts fire trucks from real emergencies and community work, and lack of timely notification to evacuate due to improper operation of alarm systems. And there's a risk to public safety and crews while responding lights and sirens. Next slide, please. While we looked at this program, we did some benchmarking with municipal comparators, and a false fire alarm fee is a common measure implemented to address costs associated with repeat false fire alarms. Successful false fire alarm management programs from other municipalities combine fees and public safety outreach. Staff surveyed other large urban departments in Ontario with existing plans or plans for false alarm strategies, and they were Toronto, Markham, Mississauga, London, Vaughan, and Brampton. OFS explored strategies that focused on education, cost containment, and not punitive measures or strategies that could deter residents from using fire alarm systems. Next slide, please. During this program, we did a lot of community outreach and stakeholder engagement. Staff conducted consultation with building owners and management associations, landlords in multi-unit dwellings, property managers of post-secondary education institutions, large shopping centers, and other facilities. We also consulted with Ottawa Community Housing. Participants agreed or strongly agreed that increased education on achieving and maintaining the fire code compliance would help property owners avoid false fire alarms. Staff also consulted with the Canadian Fire Alarm Association, who supported the recommendations. Next slide, please. So recommendation number 1. We recommend that we make amendments to the fees and charges for the Ottawa Fire Services bylaw to include fees for nuisance fire alarms. Fire alarms would apply to buildings that the Ontario Building Code dictates that a fire alarm system is required. GMA has already mentioned, we're looking at nuisance alarms, and they would be activations where it occurred where there was equipment malfunction, improper maintenance or installation, and a large one is when companies or property owners fail to notify us that they're working or testing the system, which requires us to respond. And in the fee schedule, a first offense would be, in a calendar year, would be no charge. A second false alarm in a calendar year would be a $500 fee, which would also require our fire prevention officer to get engaged with the property owner at that point. A third false alarm in a calendar year would be $1,000, and fourth and subsequent would be $1,500 moving forward. Next slide, please. What are the benefits? It balances achieving public safety and meeting community needs. It reduces false alarms and increased public safety, offsets the cost for attending false alarms. It aligns with a term of council emergency response that meets community needs, and identified as continuous improvement initiated as part of the service review program. Next slide, please. As part of our recommendation, we're recommending 2 additional FTEs to enhance fire prevention activities and the implementation of the new fire alarm strategy. It'll be on a cost recovery basis on the proposed fees. Revenues that exceed the compensation would be invested in the fire prevention program. And what are the benefits? We would have dedicated resources for false fire alarm and education and awareness, reduce complacency with building owners and agents and alarm technicians, and foster a culture of awareness and responsibility. Next slide, please. It is estimated that 10 to 20% reduction in false alarms over the next 3 years, and staff will report back on the effectiveness of the strategy. The key matrix of the evaluation we'll look at is the reduced number of responses to false fire alarms, reduced occurrences that create unnecessary risk to public. Even if we achieve 10%, that's close to 1,500 less vehicle responses. If we achieve a 20%, that's a reduction of 3,000 responses across the City of Ottawa. Changing the behavior when testing alarm systems and changing the behavior of maintenance of fire alarm systems. Next slide, please. The proposed implementation is a phased-in approach involving awareness campaign and a grace period to reduce potential impact on businesses, staff to educate building owners and owners' agents, communication plan including public information, announcements, and online resources. Bylaw amendments would come into force on July 1st, 2024. And just as I close, this is a very positive initiative. It's all about enhancing public safety. It also aligns with our first line of defense, which is fire safety and education. In 2022, Ontario had 133 fire fatalities. That's the highest the province has ever seen. So our goal behind this initiative is to enhance public safety and to save lives. So I'm certainly happy to answer any questions if there are.
Thank you, Chief Hutt, for the presentation. We do not have any public speakers on this item, so we will go right into questions from committee members, starting with Councillor Dudas.
Thank you very much, Chair. As many of you saw, I had a motion that I was contemplating that I shared with you all last night. I decided to pull it after speaking with Chief Hutt. My feelings when I saw this was building owners are expected to maintain their fire alarm systems. They're supposed to do it to a reasonable working standard, not only to prevent wasting public funds, but also to make sure that the building's occupants are safe, that the building's safe, the property's safe. I will say my intent with the motion and where I would still be interested in pursuing, but possibly not now, would be to increase the fees past a certain point at that maybe 5th mark where fire crews are being called out on a regular basis. But I wanted to thank Chief Hutt for speaking with me last night and sharing his concerns about that. As he mentioned to me, and he said in his presentation, This is a phased-in approach based on other municipalities, their best practices, the experiences they've had. And what I wanted to ask the chief was, if you are finding that you're consistently having issues with those, say, frequent flyers, you have mentioned in the report that within 3 years, you will have your team look at, come back with a full report and say whether this is working or not. Would it be possible for you to come back earlier than the 3 years so that we can determine whether or not it'd be worthy to increase the penalties, to maybe be a little less educational, a little bit more, forceful in making sure that people follow the rules?
Chair. Councillor, thanks for your question. There's two aspects, and I appreciate you bringing it up because I think we may have neglected adding some of these details in our report, so it is important we have this discussion. We do have the ability under the Ontario Fire Code that if we do find that there are members that are complacent, they're not following, the regulations, and we're doing multiple visits, we do have at our disposal orders, and we also have court proceedings that we could use under the Ontario Building Code in the event that we come across frequent flyers, and that is the intention with these technical FTEs, fire prevention officers. Well, they'll be following up. So during this first phase, we do have a mechanism that if we want to move more from an education to a more punitive, we do have some tools in our toolbox to look at that. And then to your question about, and I do appreciate 3 years is a long time, I do believe there's an opportunity for us as part of our annual report to report on our status, where we're at. And I think during those, with a year's worth of data, it would give us an opportunity to report back to committee to see how we're doing. Are we trending in the right direction? And it gives us that opportunity to pivot if we have to, if we think additional a fee schedule is required at that point.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate you taking that into consideration. And as I said, I didn't want just a slap on the wrist for folks who are basically misusing the system and not putting in the right equipment or maintaining the equipment they have, and then forcing your crews to go out there and, spend taxpayer dollars. So, but I do appreciate your concerns. I appreciate that you're going to be taking an educational phased-in approach. And I do appreciate you're going to come back a little faster just in case we do have to, pull out the stick and not the carrot. Anyway, thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just add, I was thinking along the same lines as yourself, where we may not want to wait to the end of 3 years to receive a report about the effectiveness of the strategy. If we wanted to get an update on at least half a year's worth of data, that could be embedded in the annual report that we get later next year. And so I think the chief acknowledged this, and it wouldn't be the same fulsome report that we would get at the end of 3 years, but at least it would give us some metrics and some idea about whether or not the new fee structure was effective in reducing the number of those calls. So I think, the chief has acknowledged this, but I think you've raised a good point here today, Councillor. Okay, Councillor Johnson, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm fully in support of the strategies, most certainly. I just had a couple questions in terms of the behaviors that we've seen. So I wonder, whether we're seeing, it used to be that we would see a lot of calls around colleges and universities and sort of those false alarms. I wonder if there is still a prevalence of those actors in the false alarms we're seeing, and if there's a particular outreach strategy to some of those colleges and universities.
Chair, Councillor, thanks. We do see a large number of calls in post-secondary institutions. Currently, we do have outreach programs. We work very closely with, they're on site. A lot of teams have, emergency management facilities where we work with them. And I think what I want to point out is in a lot of the schooling institutions, they're more with reference to, you know, there's a malicious alarm where somebody went and pulled the fire alarm, and really that's somewhat out of the care and control of those property owners. There is a mechanism to deal with that. What we're focusing on in this bylaw is nuisance alarms, where either the property owner isn't maintaining their system the way they should, or they haven't notified us when there's work, or they're testing the system. So, so to your point, yes, we do still go to, and we still have a large number of calls that we go to institutions, but we continually to work, and part of this program with these 2 FTEs, it will give us more outreach, more resources to do that as well, not only to schooling institutions, but other properties that we're seeing an increase of calls. But that's why I think it's very important to distinguish that we're focusing on nuisance alarms and focus on where we can deal with the property owners or the owner's agents, because they're solely responsible.
Thank you for that clarification. That's very helpful. And you know, I do wonder if when you have the 2 full-time FTEs that you might be able to, you know, as you say, expand that educational arm. Certainly for Algonquin College in my ward, you know, we have quite a strong relationship now, and they have a very active student association, and however I can support, you know, that kind of outreach with that institution, I'd be glad to. I also wanted to commend, you know, although I would indeed certainly be interested in Councillor Dudas's cost recovery through the fees, I also really would like to commend the idea of introducing a sliding fee scale so that people do have the opportunity to correct their behavior. I know we've had this conversation when it comes to other bylaw approaches at this committee, and I just wanted to highlight that, you know, I think they're, in the interest of changing behavior, giving people an opportunity to do so is a very humane approach. And so I was glad to see that approach taken, and I would encourage us to continue seeking for those opportunities when we're looking at other bylaw applications or other, you know, fines that we see in other departments that have been in the news lately. And then I was also curious if this would apply to city buildings. Would the City of Ottawa's facilities also be charged?
Yes, there are city buildings that have fire alarm systems, and again, under the Ontario Building Code, and it defines what buildings need to have these fire alarm systems. So there are some City of Ottawa buildings with fire alarm systems, and the same would apply to city buildings.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that, because there are some city buildings that have had in 2023 several fire alarms for various reasons. So I'd like to know that we're covering our own butts. So thank you.
Yes, but I would also like to add that our city facilities management is very strong, and they make sure that they follow, that their alarm systems are properly maintained, and that if they're testing the alarms, they're calling them in ahead of time. So overall, I don't see it as a big issue for the City of Ottawa. I think that our city management does a great job at managing their facilities. So I just want to put that on the record as well.
The suspense, Councillor. Which buildings? Councillor Bradley, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to staff for the presentation. Similar to Councillor Johnson's question, so what types of buildings are generating these nuisance calls? Because is it like condos? Because I live in a condo, and in the last year, like the fire department has probably been there 5 or 6 times, but there's not a lot of follow-up with residents of the building if these are nuisance calls, or if we're not properly maintaining our fire alarm system. And I guess what I want to understand is that, you know, fines are a good tool to sort of encourage property managers to maintain, but they'll pass those costs along to tenants. So is there an escalation where if you're identifying negligence and that they'll just take the fines and move along and not actually fixing the problem? How do you escalate that?
Thank you for your question. So first off, again, under the Ontario Building Code, if there's a building that has 300 occupants or more, it requires a fire alarm system. If it's 3 stories or more, it requires a fire alarm system. If it has impeded a means of egress or in and out, it may require a fire alarm system. So it's very descriptive in the Ontario Building Code what buildings require it. It does not apply to residential, single-family residential homes. We have a very active smoke alarm program. We think we're very successful with that. When it comes to fees, and that's interesting because when we looked at this and we did benchmarking with other municipalities, we focused on the nuisance alarms where, number one, work is being done and there's an alarm and they fail to notify us. That's fully the owner's responsibility. Number two, if they're not maintaining their system, again, that's fully the owner's responsibility. So it's to the suggestion of offloading those costs, it's really the owner's responsibility under the nuisance fire alarm, solely their responsibility to maintain and make sure it's operating properly.
Thank you for that. So, I mean, in a case of condos, it's often a property manager. There's not a singular owner of the building because they're all privately owned units. So I guess my question is more, if you identify a building that receives a high volume of nuisance calls, they receive the fines, but they're not fixing the problem, and it's putting the occupants at risk because it's not being properly maintained, how do you escalate that? So how do you notify, does it go through a charge? I'm just trying to understand because ultimately you want the system fixed and operating properly to ensure the safety of those occupants, and fines might not be a huge deterrence for a property manager who just passes those costs along to the occupants.
So I believe even in condominiums, there's agents, there's bylaws, there's constitution. So every premise would have to follow, who's the agent or who's looking after that premise. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if somebody is not doing what they're told they're being done, that's where we'll have the benefit now of 2 full-time fire prevention officers, because after the second alarm, they'll be going to these premises, dealing with the property owners to say, you need to get this fixed. These are the ramifications. And if they choose, if the property agents choose just to ignore, then at the end of the day, then that's where the Ontario Ontario Fire Code can be applied for inspection orders and punitive fines, if you will.
And the charge would it go to the property management company in that case when it's a condo?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Delroche, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. Chief, I'm with Councillor Dudas. I think I have some questions on the mechanics of this and the timing of when we'll see the results, and I appreciate we're trying to find some balance here, and you've looked at other jurisdictions, and I'm willing to support it today because I think we do have to work through this to ultimately find what the right mechanics of this are, because I do think there's going to be some calls that those nuisance calls they're just tread water, whether it be at post-secondary education, they're going to continue. I'm not sure there'll be a great deal of dissuasion here with the framework. I think the focus, as you've talked about today, is the building ownership, where there's systems that are failing and they haven't done sort of the proactive work to make sure that their systems are working. So I would expect that there be some progress there. The report, I think, relies a lot on the concerns about efficiency and the cost of responding to these, which is very important. But I'm wondering also if you could talk about the risks that exposes the public without being too, making folks too fearful. But if you're responding to a call for a false alarm and there is a serious call somewhere else, then presumably the vehicles deployed to that will take longer to get there. Can you comment on that? Because I think it's an important consideration. It's not just cost, it's about timely responses to actual calls.
Chair, Councillor, thank you for that question. And no, you're absolutely correct. These fire alarm calls, it's just not one truck. So we do have as I mentioned earlier in my previous presentation, we have the closest trucks responding. So if they're responding to a false alarm and another true alarm comes, somewhere else, then it's a domino effect. So then we have stations that are further away responding, which are taking longer time to get to, first on scene to try to mitigate that situation. So that is the purpose of part of this discussion today, is that, yeah, we're taking taking resources from their areas, and we're very surgical as to where stations are, where apparatus are, and it's all based on how fast can we get a first response to certain areas of the city. And if they're tied up at false alarms, we're taking them away from those real emergencies that they should be focusing on. The other element, and I addressed it shortly in my presentation, but yeah, there's 4 apparatus, and again, when we look at effective response force, in the event that there is an emergency, we do need that many people to respond to do the necessary work in the event that there is a fire. But it just means that we have a number of apparatus, and even if we reduce the false alarms by 10%, that's huge for our organization. That's less than, that's 1,500 less apparatuses running across the city. So even lights and sirens, and from a public safety perspective, there's a lot of benefits with us moving ahead with this initiative.
Okay, and certainly when we start to impose these fines, we're going to hear from folks, and I think that's going to be a key part of the message, that minutes matter. You've taught us this at several meetings. Minutes matter, so we have to make sure that that our teams can get to people as quickly as possible and the fires as quickly as possible. I'm also interested in how you'd apply this to city facilities. To me, I take your point that we're a well-run city, and we've got certainly we've been investing in our buildings and our systems and to meet codes, and we should be diligent in making sure that we're not on the top 10 list here. But we've got all these new transit stations coming online, and I just wonder, how do we deal with that, right? To me, I really don't want to take from Peter to pay Paul, that there'd be repeat kind of nuisance calls from people pulling firearms, the trucks respond, and then we have this huge bill for OC Transpo that's going towards something other than transit. So could you just comment on, again, how we're going to handle city facilities? I'm particularly interested once we get into the new stations that are going to come online, hopefully in the near future.
Thank you for that question. And I think earlier we stated, and there's an opportunity. We have to absolutely start somewhere. We're thinking from an education, a softer approach versus punitive. I think if we commit to come back as part of our annual report in a year's time just to see where we're at, I think we'll be probably in a better position to see, what the numbers are as they relate to city facilities potentially.
Okay. Yeah, I like that, because I think, again, if we see the stations start to get into the top 10 list, I'm not sure I would support sending money to you if it's something that's not having an effect and is not preventable. I was surprised with the response to calls, that there's a strict formula to that if it was a single dwelling, that you might be able to have a smaller response versus a multi-residential building. So maybe I watched too much TV and the shows that you think you'd understand the fire department, but could you just talk about that in terms of the requirement to send that kind of fleet to even a single dwelling home versus a multi-residential unit?
So Chair, through you, excellent question. We have numerous call types. I'm just off the top of my head, I know we have probably over 150 different call types. Is it a single family dwelling home, which would only require 2 apparatus to respond to? When we get into buildings that require fire alarm systems, we've already suggested that the building code dictates who has to have a commercial fire alarm system. Occupants over 300. So we have to take a look at the risk, and what we do is from a risk analysis perspective, and then we look at effective response. So based on if there was a fire in this unit, we have to go up so many flight of stairs. A crew has to do fire ventilation. A crew has to do fire suppression. A crew has to do rescue and salvage and overhaul. So it's all about sending the right resources for types of calls. So, we have to treat every alarm as if there's a fire, and heaven forbid, if it is a fire, then we have the right resources there to mitigate that as quickly and as possibly. And it's a public safety, but we're constantly looking at our call types, and if there's an opportunity to reduce vehicle responses, we do that. And then there's occasions where we're not sending enough personnel based on what we have to do on scene. So every call type is certainly reviewed and analyzed, and we send the right resources accordingly.
Sorry, but did I read correctly that there's a minimum requirement in terms of what you must send? big or small?
So as part of our accreditation, again, we look at what the critical tasks are, and there's a crew can do this task, a crew can do this task, and a crew can do this task. So based on those fire suppression evolutions, there's a certain number of people that we have to have on scene for certain calls.
Okay. So again, I'm going to support this today. I think there's a couple soft spots to it. One is sort of the treading water calls where, again, there's no consequences to the person who pulled the fire alarm, and so the institution pays. And again, you may not see some traction there, but certainly some of the other buildings where, there can be some proper follow-up, we're likely to see some traction. I think the other soft spot for me is just on the need for additional FTE. I guess I've always thought that as we get better buildings that are less likely to have serious fires and they have suppression systems, that the fire information officers, that we have less of a need for those types of FTE, and then that we could start to shift those to some of the more kind of pressing matters like the one that you bring today. So I guess I'm interested in why can't those 2 FTEs be absorbed with your existing complement of fire services officers, that someone may say, hey, the buildings are more resilient to fire. Do we really need the same complement of fire services officers that we had in 1980 to now? Thanks.
Thank you for that question. I wish that was the case. We're in a society where we have to, again, our mandate with the Ontario Fire Marshal is our first line is fire prevention. So that's the first. So for all means, the last thing we want to do is have to send apparatus and vehicles to an incident. If we can prevent that, that's our ultimate, absolutely our ultimate goal. As part of our benchmarking exercise with other municipalities, and just, you take Toronto, Mississauga, Vaughan, and Brampton, one fire prevention officer in average, per capita, look after around 19,000 in capita. In Ottawa currently, we have one fire prevention officer looks after 3,300 per capita. So our numbers suggest that if we're taking on any other initiatives, we're going to have to find some resources to help us with that. And I really think it is a cost recovery model where, with the fees that we intend to collect, it should be revenue neutral. And if there are any extra fees, and I think this is important to keep in mind, at the start of my presentation, we said there was 37% false alarms. We're focusing on the malicious. We're focusing on 13% as phase 1. There's still 24% other false alarms out there, where with these dedicated fire prevention officers, so if they are malicious alarms, or if there's places where alarm systems are being damaged just because of where sensors are located, these fire prevention officers can be proactive and go and deal with those premises as well, and in hopes to deter or sort of eliminate or reduce that 37% false alarms. So,
and lastly, who's responsible for responding calls to the terminal at the airport? Is that the fire service at the airport, or is that the City of Ottawa Fire Service?
So the airport is unique. They have an air side, which is managed by the Airport Authority, and then they have a non-air side. So the airport itself actually falls off the air side, and we do respond there as well in conjunction with the Airport Authority.
Okay, and they would fall under this new policy?
Sorry?
They would fall under this new policy?
They would fall. They have an alarm system. Maybe that's a question I can pass over as part of our public consultation to Deputy Chief Adams, the Airport Authority.
Yes, thank you. So the Airport Authority has been consulted, and they have to follow the fee structure as well. From a call perspective, historically, the call volumes there are very low as it relates to nuisance alarms. So we're not anticipating a major impact.
Thank you. Those are all my questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kavanagh, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief Hutt, for bringing this forward. I've asked questions about this in the past, and I really appreciate all the work that's being done. Obviously, this is important so that you can get to the real fires. To have this nuisance is just not acceptable. I also appreciate the fact that you've been working with Ottawa Community Housing, which is obviously a very large organization and has many buildings. And so I appreciate that cooperation with our nonprofit sector. But I have a question in terms of smaller buildings or where there's residents needing supportive housing. And I don't know if this is a big part of the false alarms, but in terms of people that have mental health issues, that like schizophrenics who really believe there's a fire and maybe pull an alarm. I don't know if that's been a big issue, but if you could tell me how that's handled, that'd be helpful.
Chair, thank you for that question. Yes, absolutely. It was very important for us to consult with Ottawa Community Housing. We do respond to a number of false alarms across the city of Ottawa for mental health related items where accidentally or knowingly they pull a fire alarm not knowing potentially what the consequences are. Or we have situations where we have people, not only from a mental health perspective, but smoking in a hallway, or there's a perceived emergency. And I think I'm pretty confident what we're proposing has a real balance on that, where we're taking that education approach, focusing on the nuisance alarms and not necessarily the malicious, or so it's taking that equation out of this, and we're really focusing on putting the onus on the property owners, where they're not maintaining their system or they fail to phone us when they're working on the system. But that is a serious item that we do face every day, where we're going to perceived emergencies. But again, we don't want to use a punitive measure for if somebody thinks there's an emergency. I'd rather them give us a call. I'd rather go and verify that there is no emergency. But we do run into situations certainly where alarm stations are pulled, and it's that education piece where with these fire prevention officers, they can go and deal with these residents, these building owners, even if it is Ottawa Community Housing, because we do have an awesome relationship with that group. But maybe we can offer recommendations of how we can help prevent that in the future.
I really appreciate all of your work, Chief Hutt. I think that's great, and I look forward to next steps on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Devine, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Wish I could be there in person. I'm a sickie, just like Councillor Dudas. So I was very happy to see the two recommendations on the from Ottawa Fire Services on today's agenda. The one we just passed for rural firefighters, and this one we have here. I'm really enthused by the work that OFS is doing. Each of these are the kind of practical, low-cost, high-yield solutions that offer significant improvements to some real problems. I really hope that we get unanimous support for this recommendation here. It might not have the same emotional resonance as the rural firefighters agenda recommendation, which I was very happy to support. But this one here, the public safety impact citywide is quite significant. So I had a really good chat with Chief Hutt earlier this year to discuss false fire alarm strategy. I'm glad it made it to the agenda so soon here. I agree with Councillor DeRoche, as much as the financial implications of addressing this are massive. The public safety contemplation of painting the picture of what happens when 37% of our responses are to false fire alarms, the public safety impact of what we cannot attend to is what I hope resonates just as much. So a lot of my questions have been addressed, but thank you, Councillor Kavanagh and Chief Hutt, for referencing that Ottawa Community Housing has been consulted here, because I did notice in the report that under the Mississauga has a different tiered system where they have a different fee for nonprofit housing. So, but just to confirm, Chief Hutt, you consulted with Ottawa Community Housing and they are supportive of this recommendation?
Chair, through you. Yes, we have, as early as a week ago, we had a conversation, and their support. They understand the balance of, for maintaining their system and for failure to notify, and they're very comfortable with the nuisance that we're focusing on in this strategy.
Thank you, Chief. So this program comes into effect July 1st, 2024. Forgive me if you already made reference to this, but can you describe the educational component that will happen between now and July 1st? What kind of communications will happen between OFS and landlords and owners? Because similar to the automated speed enforcement camera, our goal is not to have to impose fees. This program will be successful if we are not having to levy fees. So what kind of communications are you having with owners and landlords between now and July 1st?
Thank you. Deputy Chief Adams has been looking after the consultation part, so I'll pass it over to him.
Yeah, good morning, Councillor. So we've had extensive conversations with all of our major sectors in terms of the false alarm that will be applied. We continue to have those conversations. Anyone who's received their first false alarm after the passing of this bylaw will receive a letter that provides them with notification of the new fee structure and what that implies, as well as allow them an opportunity to ask questions with myself and our Division Chief of Fire Prevention. We will be holding as well some additional public consultations, just more of information sessions and questions. We were able to, as previously mentioned, meet with many of our larger stakeholders, but there were several that were unable to meet at some of the times that we were providing. So we will continue to conduct larger scale public consultation meetings and education sessions, as well as provide everybody with letters that explains the fee structure that will be coming into place as of July 1st.
Thank you. Just to end, so while I can appreciate that my colleague, Councillor Dudas and DeRoche raised questions about raising the fees for more cost recovery, I do trust Chief Hutt's approach here to focus more on education, and that will produce good results. If other municipalities in Ontario have already addressed this concern with measures similar to what's on the table here, and if those municipalities have seen a decline in false alarms, this is a no-brainer for me, and I hope we all put our support behind it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers on this item? I'll just offer a few comments. First of all, I thought the report was excellent. You provided a really good, detailed account of what's happening across the province, but also the cost element. When you send a full response to a call, in the report on page 10, you list all the crew that go out and the costs, about $3,800 of just responding to a call. And when so many of them are false calls, as you said, crisscrossing the city, it adds up over time. And to Councillor DeRoche's point and others, it takes valuable resources out of our complement while we're trying to respond to false alarms when there could be actual and true emergencies, people who need our response. And that's something that doesn't sit well with me. On the flip side, with the malicious calls, which is a different category of calls, I think it was Councillor Johnson who first raised it. We've all been in, a post-secondary residence, an apartment building, a hotel, where the alarm goes off and everyone sighs, and you know what? No one leaves. And there's going to come a time where there's going to be a significant fire or emergency, and people who have, it's like, Chicken Little, or the boy that cried wolf, right? People have been through this over and over again, and we don't get to the issue, and that is holding people responsible for repeated fire alarm pulls. So can you just expand, how do we, let's say if it's in a mall or a residence and there's video, we can see someone actually doing it. Does the Ottawa Fire Service have the jurisdiction to lay a charge, or do we present evidence to the Ottawa Police Service and then they do the investigation?
Thank you, Chair. That's a very good question. Actually, if somebody is intentionally tampering with a fire alarm system, it actually falls under the criminal code. And yeah, so we've had situations where if it is witnessed, we relay that information to Ottawa Police, and charges, criminal code charges actually can be, and it's under mischief, I believe. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll just add that, in some buildings, we have multiple malicious alarms, whether it's for mental health reasons or for other reasons. And in those cases, we work with the building owners to either set up CCTV cameras, ink dyes. There's all kinds of other methods of catching people. The police are always involved in those types of discussions as well. So while we play a role in helping people mitigate those situations, certainly the police are heavily involved, and we encourage them to charge people with criminal code offense when this happens, just because of the severity. On the multiple alarms issue and people being complacent, I think that is a huge public safety issue for us, and this is what we're trying to address. And I'd also like to thank you personally, Chair, for raising this issue over and over again in the past few years with regards to the false alarms at this committee meeting. So it's certainly important to us, it's important to the citizens, and we're hoping to get unanimous support again. Thank you.
Great, thank you, GM. I certainly, in my mind, differentiate between a nuisance call and a malicious call. They're both putting the public at risk. There are different strategies to address both. This one, I think, is more focused on the nuisance calls, but certainly the malicious ones can't be ignored either. I'm not suggesting there are, but I just want to raise that they put the public at risk, and it's the complacency issue in buildings where this is a repeat occurrence. People lose that, the level of interest that they should have. When an alarm goes off, you need to be aware of what's going on and always err on the side of caution. That is, err on there's an emergency, let me get out and go to a safe spot, and then assess after the fact whether or not it's a real call or not. But thank you for that report. So colleagues, we do have a three-part recommendation before us. Do I need to read that, or are we okay just carrying this at this time? Is this matter carried? Carried. Thank you. Thank you again, GM and Chief, on this matter. Item 6 is the update on towing and storage regulations and the provincial regime. So we'll just take a moment for staff to come in. GM, do you want to introduce this matter?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would. First of all, I'd like to say that Manager Bietlo and her team have done an incredible job at managing this file from the very early onset of actually creating the city bylaw, and then working through the transition to the province and making sure that there are limited gaps between what we've done and what the province is now doing. And it's not always easy. So I'm happy you're allowing the presentation to take place. The work is great. And once again, I'll pass it over to Manager Bietlo for the presentation. Good morning, Chair. Thank you, GM Ayat. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Josh Davis, who's a bylaw review specialist. Josh has been the member of my team that's actually been sitting on the provincial working group. So he's here to support me today and here to deliver some of the presentation as well. Mr. Chair, I'd like to start by providing, next slide, please. I'd like to start by providing a bit of background. Members may recall that on January 1st, 2002, City Council decided to start regulating the towing and storage sector in Ottawa. And that consisted of a new business licensing regime for tow truck operators, tow truck drivers, and vehicle storage operators, along with accompanying regulations. At that time, the province of Ontario had just begun the development of its own province-wide regulatory regime for this sector. the legislation had been passed, but the regulations had not been developed yet, and the timelines were unknown. So council decided that it could not wait, and the city's local system was implemented at that time. We knew, though, that the provincial efforts were leading towards a provincial transition. So a transition to have one provincial regulator province-wide. We are now at that point. The provincial regime is now implemented and in force and has been since January 1st. The key piece of legislation in this space is the Towing and Storage Safety Enforcement Act. This legislation replaces local bylaws for the towing sector, and in fact, municipal council's authority to license this sector has been abolished since January 1st. The provincial regime creates a yearly certification requirement as well as regulations for tow companies, tow truck drivers, and vehicle storage providers, similar to what council had done in its own licensing regime. And the provincial regime applies province-wide. So regardless of where the tow company comes from or where services are being delivered in the province, the same rules will apply. Monsieur le Président, le 1er janvier 2024, le régime de réglementation provinciale pour le secteur de remorquage est entré en vigueur et le transfert de la surveillance de ce secteur au niveau provincial a eu lieu. En même temps, le pouvoir du conseil municipal de réglementer dans ce secteur a été aboli. Et donc, la province de l'Ontario est désormais le seul organisme de réglementation de ces services. La loi provinciale en question remplace les règlements locaux préexistants pour ce secteur. La loi comprend une exigence de certification annuelle ainsi que divers règlements complémentaires qui seront en vigueur dans l'ensemble de la province. Ainsi, les mêmes règles s'appliqueront à tous les exploitants, quel que soit l'endroit où ils délivrent leurs services dans la province. Next slide, please.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to summarize the key aspects of the provincial regime for the towing sector. The legislation has established a single regulatory regime and provincial oversight model for the towing sector. The model is based on yearly certifications for tow operators, tow truck drivers, and storage providers. This means that if these entities want to provide service in Ontario, they will have to be certified under this regime, subject to very specific exemptions. Out-of-province tow companies and drivers who are providing services in Ontario are bound to the same requirements as Ontario-based providers, including being certified. The certification process and accompanying regulations will be administered by the Director of Towing, along with an oversight office. The provincial regime sets out regulations in the key areas of public safety, consumer protection, and the protection of property. There will be police records checks for all certificate applicants and for renewals, as well as mandatory driver training. The Director of Towing will review and approve fares and rates as a part of the certification process. Tow providers will have to obtain consent, disclose rates for service, and provide invoices prior to towing. There's a code of conduct for tow truck drivers that requires compliance with all applicable laws. Tow service operators are required to ensure that only safe and mechanically fit tow trucks, as well as safe and appropriate equipment, are used by their tow truck drivers. Storage operators will have to provide timely notification to the vehicle owner for the storage location and applicable rates.
Le régime provincial établit des règlements dans les domaines clés de la sécurité du public, la protection du consommateur et la protection des biens. Toutes les personnes demandant un certificat ou le renouvellement de leur certificat feront l'objet d'une vérification de leur casier judiciaire et une formation obligatoire sera requise pour tous les conducteurs et conductrices. Le directeur provincial examinera et approuvera les prix et les tarifs dans le cadre du processus de certification. Les exploitants devront obtenir le consentement du client. Ils devront divulguer leurs tarifs pour le service et remettre leurs factures avant de procéder au remorquage. Un code de conduite pour les conducteurs et les conductrices de dépanneuses a été établi et exige le respect de toutes les lois applicables. Et finalement, les exploitants des services d'entreposage de véhicules devront informer le propriétaire du véhicule du lieu de l'entreposage et des tarifs applicables en tout temps.
The regime also provides administrative tools and offenses for noncompliance. For example, the Director of Towing has the authority to issue, renew, suspend, or decline certifications. They may impose conditions on certificate holders to investigate eligibility of an applicant to be certified, including any breaches of the Code of Conduct. Enforcement of this provincial regime is undertaken by police officers from the province of Ontario and Ministry of Transportation enforcement officers who have been appointed under the Act. In addition to enforcing the legislation and issuing charges for violations, inspectors have the authority to examine a tow truck and request documentation to ensure compliance with the regulations. Next slide, please. In response to these legislative changes, including the removal of municipal authority to license the tow sector, several amendments are required to the city's licensing bylaw where it contains towing and storage provisions. Staff are recommending 3 broad areas of amendments to the licensing bylaw. First, staff are recommending the full repeal of Schedule 35 of the licensing bylaw, which contains towing and storage licensing provisions for tow truck drivers, tow service operators, and vehicle storage facility operators, as well as the repeal of all applicable definitions and subsections related to towing from the licensing bylaw. The city's business licensing regime for towing no longer has any force and effect and has been replaced by provincial regulations. Second, staff are recommending the repeal of towing and storage related provisions in Schedule number 3 of the licensing bylaw, which relates to public garages. Particularly, we are recommending the repeal of Section 21, which establishes the fares and rates and service standards for the storage of towed vehicles at public garages. We know that these regulations are now covered and addressed under the provincial regime. And finally, we're recommending some minor wording changes to continue the existing prohibition on all licensed private parking enforcement agencies, PPEAs, from being a tow truck driver or tow service operator. This prohibition was enacted in 2021 due to the inherent conflict of interest that exists where a business is able to ticket a vehicle as well as tow them. Since this area is not covered off in the provincial legislation, we're recommending keeping it, and it requires a slight wording change. Next slide, please.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to summarize by going over what this means for Ottawa. So as of January 1st, the province of Ontario is now the sole regulator for the tow and storage sector province-wide. The City of Ottawa has ceased issuing and renewing licenses to tow and storage operators and is no longer collecting licensing fees. Fares and rates for towing services that were previously established by Council are no longer in effect, and going forward, each certified company can set their own fares and rates for services, but these will be subject to provincial review as part of the provincial certification system. The Provincial Director of Towing has the authority to intervene where those fares are deemed to be excessive. We understand that all approved rates and fares will be posted on a provincial webpage so that consumers can be aware of the approved maximum rates for any particular provider or company, and then can choose their company accordingly. Residents will be able to identify a provincially certified tow truck, as they are required to have the certificate number painted on the side of the truck. And this replaces the municipal tow plates that were previously issued here in Ottawa. And then finally, complaints about towing and storage services can now be directed to the Ministry of Transportation. There has been an online complaints portal that's been established by the ministry, as well as a 1-800 number that's available for consumers. So that concludes the presentation, Mr. Chair. Merci. I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Certainly long-awaited changes provincially for this industry, and appreciate the overview this morning. So thank you to you both. Councillor DesRoches has his hand up, so I'll recognize him.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And we do use a lot of stamps for letters to the province, telling them what they should do, where we don't think they're responding adequately, but they deserve full credit, the province does, for the oversight that they're going to bring to this, for what was a sector that has had some very outrageous conduct and, quite frankly, bottom feeder conduct in the marketplace. So perhaps it was a few apples, seemed like more than a few apples, but it was quite clear that this sector was not going to regulate itself. So there is clearly a need for the government to step in and put some higher standards here. So look forward to that, and the province deserves full credit for the leadership that they've shown on this file. I note, however, that the Auto Police Service will enforce the regime, and we will accept that. I'm wondering, we will continue, and the police service isn't here, we're going to continue to enforce just the basic highway traffic rules, that they're not going to speed to calls, and we had a terrible tragedy, I think, on Meadowlands area where a tow truck was racing to be the first on the scene to take advantage of that, and there was a fatality. And again, this is the outrageous conduct that we want to see stopped. So just if you could speak to, I get that the police are going to enforce kind of the marketplace rules of this, but the driver behavior, the conduct on the roads, the racing to calls, we're going to continue to put priority to that to ensure that it doesn't happen, and hopefully it feeds into that regulatory regime that if you're going to race to calls and put the public at risk, then you're going to see some consequences for that in terms of your licensing. So if you could just comment on that aspect, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I can't speak for the Ottawa Police, but I can confirm that all the rules of the road under the HTA, as well as the new conduct rules under this legislation, will be applied. They will be primarily enforced by the police service as they're moving violations. It's my understanding that any contraventions of the HTA or other legislation will be taken into consideration by the Director of Towing when either deciding to certify a company or a driver or renewing their certificates. So good driving record is certainly front and center in this regime.
Good to hear that, and it will take the public as well to monitor this and to report situations of infraction, and pleased that it was included there that the public needs to report this if they feel they're being treated unfairly or that there's safety concerns at play here. So again, this is a step in the right direction, and full credit to the province for stepping up to show some leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Certainly, I concur that we needed greater uniformity across Ontario to go from municipal jurisdiction to municipal jurisdiction, even within the same region, and have completely different rules needed to be addressed, and really better protection for consumers. Again, as the councillor just indicated, the Wild West in many cases of some tow truck operators and companies. I think bottom feeders would take issue to be compared or in the same category as some tow truck operators or companies. It really had to be addressed, and I agree wholeheartedly with the councillor's comments. So any other questions on this matter? Okay, so is this item carried? Good, thank you very much.
Chair, if you would permit me, I would just like to publicly acknowledge Director Roger Chapman for the great work he did in his role, issuing licenses and also denying issuing licenses to those very difficult situations. It took a lot of character, and Roger has done an amazing job, so I just want to publicly thank him for that.
Thank you. And I'm sure Roger or Mr. Chapman's happy that this is now in provincial hands. Absolutely. Thank you to our Chief of Ottawa Bylaw. Thank you, GM, as well for that. Okay, we've dealt with item 7. Item 8 is in-camera items. Any in-camera? Not aware of any. Notices of motion. I recognize Councillor Plante.
Thank you, and just another shout out to Roger, who seems to be getting a lot of love right now, but well-deserved, and he helped craft the motion, the notice of motion I'm about to read. I'll read it in English, actually. Whereas there has been an increase in the number of problematic occupied and unoccupied properties in Ottawa, and whereas these properties generate frequent complaints and safety concerns which negatively impact the surrounding communities, such as vacant properties, property standards, property maintenance violations, waste, debris, pests, and other nuisances, and whereas the City of Edmonton developed a problematic properties webpage to help residents navigate these type of complaints and concerns, and Ottawa residents would also benefit from access to similar information. Therefore, be it resolved that staff explore the feasibility of creating a problematic property page on the City of Ottawa website, en français et en anglais, which includes the definition of what is and what isn't a problematic property, a link to 311 and other resources, a flow chart to assist communities, and a list of departments involved in a problematic property. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. That is a notice of motion, and we will deal with that on March 21st. Okay, any inquiries? Any other business? Given that our business is now complete, this meeting is adjourned. At our March 21st meeting, we will receive the Ottawa Paramedics update on the launch of the long-awaited implementation of the Medical Priority Dispatch System in Ottawa. So again, March 21st. Thank you, everyone. Our meeting is adjourned.